لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. So today we're going to start off with medical jurisprudence, and the text that we're going to follow is prepared by the Organization of Knowledge in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia for the purpose of advanced medical jurisprudence studies. Right? And like I mentioned, we're not going to follow the text word to word over here. I will just give you a crux of what is mentioned in each chapter, along with whatever additional information that might be needed. Now, if you've gone through the index of the chapter, you'll see that this book is divided into 18 chapters, right? And we'll try to cover 2 chapters each week. So this should take us about 9 days in total, 9 classes to cover this text. Now, without further ado, let's just begin. Uh, Chapter number 1, Introduction to Medical Jurisprudence. Now, the word of the subject itself, it has 2 words. It has medicine, and then it has jurisprudence. Al-fiqh wa tib, right? So, fiqh, when we use the word, linguistically, it means to understand. It could be the understanding of anything, basically. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this word when he talks about the people of Shu'aib alayhi salam. Uh, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. That Ya Shu'aib, we don't understand most of what you're saying. So the word used is nafqah, which is from fiqh. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Surah Al-Isra, وَإِن مِّن شَيْءٍ إِلَّا يُسَبِّحُ بِحَمْدِهِ وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ تَسْبِيحَهُ. That there's nothing that does not perform the tasbih of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وَلَكِنْ لَا تَفْقَهُونَ, but you do not understand how they perform their tasbih. Right? So both of these verses from the Quran tell us that al-fiqh equals to understanding. Could be of anything. But when we talk about fiqh in its legal definition, we refer to jurisprudence, and we refer to the ilm bil ahkam al-shar'iyya. It is the knowledge of the Islamic laws which are derived from their evidences, their detailed evidences, those Islamic laws derived from the Quran, the Sunnah, ijma, or from doing qiyas, from making an analogy on these previous sources, right? So that is the meaning of fiqh that's going to be used over here. Then you have the word at-tib in Arabic, which has multiple meanings, one of which is medicine, which concerns us. Sometimes it could also mean to be expertise in something, right? So being a tabib, generally understood, is being a doctor, but it can also be used for someone who might be an expert in other fields as well. And sometimes it could also mean used in the word of magic, right? So the Arabs had this ada of thinking good things, right? So if someone was mashoor, like someone had been cursed by magic, they used to call that person matboob, in the hopes and in good intentions that the person is going to be cured. And it could also mean having a certain way, an ada of sorts, right? So, for example, they have this saying, "Ma dhaka bitibbi," i.e., that is not my way. That's not my style, right? So that is something that they use as well. But like I mentioned, we're using the first meaning of tib, which is medicine over here. So, but that leaves us with the word medical jurisprudence. What does that mean in a whole compilation? right? So one of the definitions is that it is the knowledge through which you know the events or the conditions of the human body, whether it is sick or whether it is healthy. And how do you protect the health that you have and retain the health that you might have lost, right? Or you could define it as being uh, the ilm, or the knowledge, or the subject related to the protection of health or the sustenance of health and the protection from diseases and its relieving, right? So this is what the word at would mean when we talk about it uh, istilahan. Now, what is al-fiqh al-tibbi? What is medical jurisprudence? آه، الأحكام الفقهية والقواعد الشرعية المتعلقة بالمهن الصحية. It is the combination of the fiqh rulings and principles that are related to the health profession. Then, secondly, the book talks about the different contributions to the field of medicine that has been done by the Muslim doctors and ulama, right? Ranging from inventing new medical techniques and surgical tools to institutionalizing hospitals, writing treaties and books on it, and other things, which you can easily read. And this is a section on history. And if someone wants to go more deeper, you'll find so much more on internet with an easy search. So I highly recommend that you do read the second part on your own. Lastly, we'll talk about حكم تعلم الطب, the importance of, or what is the hukum of studying medicine, right? What is the hukum that you study medicine? Well, we know that people, in whatever time frame they are, in whatever time zone they are, whether it be today, be 100 years back or 100 years forwards, they're always going to be in need of a doctor, someone who can help them when they're sick, someone who can help manage their sickness and relieve it through the use of medicine or surgery or whatever other medical tools are available to them, right? And if you don't have a number of doctors that are sufficient to meet this requirement of the society, well, then that's very problematic. How so? Because people's life are going to be in danger if, because of diseases, because of accidents, because of other disasters. So you would need a medical team, a number of medical professionals who can aid in these situations. And we know that diseases and accidents, disasters are part of life. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designed this world in order to test us, right? And so just like any other trait or any other subject, which a Muslim society would need to function, right? Just like any of that is farz kifaya, so is the field of medicine, so is the field of healthcare. It is also farz kifaya. Farming is farz kifaya because that is the main source of how you grow your food. Trade in some conditions and some pictures would be farz kifaya, right? And so similarly, medicine would also be farz kifaya. But what do we mean by the word farz kifaya? Well, it means that if a group of people sufficient enough to meet the needs of a particular society uh, take on this responsibility, then everyone else is relieved of it. But if they don't, then everyone is complicit in this crime of not performing a farz duty enjoined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think this is a very important distinction to make, that it is a group of people sufficient to meet the needs of the society, sufficient to meet the needs of the society. Emphasizing this because a lot of times people would define Farz Kifaya as if some people do it, then everybody's relieved of the duty, or else everyone becomes sinful. It's not just sufficient for a few people to do it, it's necessary for enough people to do it that the society's needs are being met. So this is a very important point that needs to be made when defining what Farz Kifaya is. Sometimes you don't have that. For example, Salatul Janaza is also Farz Kifaya, but obviously you can't really quantify a need in that scenario. And so that's why it's defined as if some people do it, the rest don't need to, or they won't be sinful if they don't, right? But some the definition sometimes would cause a confusion of what actually Farz Kifaya would entail when talking about things related to society. So hopefully that makes the definition of what Farz Kifaya is a bit more clear, right? And Fuqaha have actually explicitly stated medicine as being amongst Farz Kifaya. And they didn't just state that as Farz Kifaya, they actually used to encourage people to learn medicine. For example, Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that after the ilm of halal and haram, I don't know of an ilm which is more noble than medicine, right? He also mentioned that there's only two types of knowledge, ilmul adyan wa ilmul abdan, that you have the knowledge of the deen, which is related to, your spiritual life and your afterlife, and then you have the knowledge of medicine, which is for the sake of your human body. وَمَا عَدَى ذَلِكَ بُلْغَةُ الْمَجْلِسِ. Other than these two things, everything else is just for the sake of conversation, right? Whatever you study other than that, it's just so you can talk with other people about different things. And just like Imam Shafi rahimahullah ta'ala, there were so many other ulama which actually used to be experts in medicine, right? Even in India before the British colonization, medicine was actually part of their syllabus. So most of the ulama would also be experts in the field of medicine, right? And so that is the kind of importance that they placed with studying medical literature. Now, do we come to this conclusion that medical jurisprudence is farz kifaya? Because that's necessary. We're making a claim. We need to have evidence to support this claim. Well, first of all, as we will look at the maqasid al-shari'iyya, the higher objectives of the Islamic law, whatever law that we have is for the sake of protecting and promoting a person's life and their aql, their intelligence, right? And for that purpose, you are vast in need of studying medicine, right? And specializing in it because of the fact that there are so many cases and so many instances that without this, you can't protect life or the mental health of a person, their sanity, right? If someone has Alzheimer's, you need to know how to treat it, right? Or else the intellect's going to go away. If someone's in a car accident and they have a concussion, a head injury, you need to be able to perform a complex surgery in some cases in order to protect that person, or they might lose everything that they have. They might even die. And if not, they might lose their memory. So you need to have that knowledge. You need to have a person expert enough to be able to solve those problems, right? So there's this qaida that you should remember, ما لا يتم الواجب به إلا به فهو واجب. If a wajib act if a compulsory obligatory act cannot be completed without the use of something else, right? So that something else would also become wajib. So, for example, in modern day warfare, if without the use of guns and bombs, if you can't wage a war, then the use of these military items would become a wajib. Obviously, you can't expect to go to a war waging swords and carrying arrows. That's not sufficient enough. So, adopting other means of warfare would become an actual wajib in this case. So, similarly, if you cannot protect the nafs and the aql, people's life and intellect, without medicine, then medicine would become wajib. Similarly, the Prophet ﷺ, he instructed and actually ordered some of the villagers to use medicine, right? And the hadith mentioned in Tirmizi, Abu Dawud, and Ibn Majah, the Prophet ﷺ, people came to him from the village asking him, Ya Rasulullah, anatadawa, O Prophet, should we take medicine or medical treatment? And the Prophet ﷺ, he replied, uh, Tadawo ya ibadallah, O servants of Allah, use medicine, right? Then he mentions the hikmah behind that. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ لَمْ يَزَعْ دَاءً إِلَّا وَزَعَ لَهُ شِفَاءً غَيْرَ دَاءٍ واحد. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not revealed or has not made any disease without making a remedy for it. However, there is one exception to that. They asked, what is that? And he replied, Al-Haram, that is old age. This is another debate entirely whether or not we can delay aging, but it is inevitable that we do age. Yes, our lifestyle choices can actually uh, make that process faster or slower, but once you start aging, there's no going back. It's impossible for you to now turn back into a 12-year-old or an infant, right? So aging is an inevitable process. We haven't found a cure yet. Interestingly enough, because of this hadith, the efforts that so many people are making, especially in this day and age of cryogenic technology and advances in AI, this whole notion of protecting all of your memories so that can be transferred to another body and whatever not. Um, the materialists will make an effort for that. That is because they don't believe in the afterlife. But according to this hadith, one could possibly say that all such efforts are futile, and trying to make that happen is a waste of resources, a waste of time, and probably going against the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is also a discussion that could possibly take place within this larger context of what we're studying. But back to the hadith in which the Prophet Islam is ordering the people of the village to take medical treatment, when we all know that the people of the village have much healthier lifestyles than those living in the cities. Uh, Better quality food, less pollution, more exercise, more exposure to the sun. So everything which basically counts as a checkpoint or a standard for health, that is met in a more better fashion when you're living in a village than you would be living in a city. So if the people of the village are being ordered to take medical treatment, then it would be an obligation, and the order will apply to the people of the cities even more because obviously they're more prone to diseases. Also, it's sunnah. The Prophet Islam, he himself would, whenever he got sick or any of the Sahaba got sick, he would arrange for doctors and medicines. and even medical schools. So it wasn't actually a school, but medical knowledge was actually taught in the time of the Prophet ﷺ. There were nursing schools within the city of Medina. And so these are some of the evidences on why using medicine is falsifier or it is endorsed by the Sharia. Now, what are the objectives of the text that we're studying? And so although there are multiple sectors who could use this book, particularly physicians, other healthcare practitioners, scholars, researchers in Islamic law, and even people of the general public. This book, however, was designed especially for the students of medicine and health professionals. And some of the objectives of this book were number one, to enable physicians to find solutions to contemporary medical issues. So they would know what the Islamic rulings are related to each of these issues, so they could abide by what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills from them. Similarly, for example, it is to highlight the importance of studying medical fiqh, right? Because the works that physicians and doctors do that might involve a lot of practices that come under the purview of Islamic law, right? Whether they are because of the nusus, the texts, or because they are derived from qiyas, making an analogy from them. But both doctors and medical students need to know exactly what the religious regulations are in these situations so they don't fall into some mistake or sin. This also highlights the perfection of Sharia and that it doesn't matter in what era you're living in and what problems you are facing, Islam is very much capable of solving all of these issues. So it could be a good point in da'wah as well. Also, because medical jurisprudence is part of the larger study of fiqh itself, and there's a lot of importance placed on it. The Prophet Islam, he mentions, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intends good with, right? Then he bestows him the understanding of religion and understanding how you should work with the medical field is also one of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Also, this could help medical students to choose a specialty, right? When you know the fiqh behind medicine and fiqh behind the different fields of medicine, then you can make a more educated choice about what specialization to adopt. So you might not go into, let's say, cosmetic surgery because most of what's being done over there uh, might be haram, right? So you'd want to choose a profession where you are doing your absolute best to do what's halal. And also, like I mentioned, this text could be for general consumers of knowledge as well. Uh, I want to get an elective surgery. Is it halal for me to get that done, right? For example, the issue with teeth. Can I get braces? Will it affect my salah, for example? Or what are the conditions or cases where I can get them? Can I get a blood transfusion or an organ transplant? Would that be permissible? In what scenario, in what case, right? And so, even if you're just a consumer of medicine, if you're just a patient, this knowledge can also help you know what options are available for you, what is halal and what is haram, what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And so, this was the muqarrar for the first text. And with that, we come to the conclusion of chapter number 1. Chapter number 2 talks about the higher objectives of Sharia, right? And so we know Islam has come to reform society, maintain and sustain its safety and purity of individuals and the society as whole, right? And so this is a whole discussion in itself, but primarily there are five objectives known as the primary maqasid of Sharia, right? So they're primary higher objectives of Sharia, which are the preservation of number one, religion, number two, life, number three, mind and intellect, number four, lineage, and number five, property. Lineage and self-respect or self or chastity, you might say, right? And so maqasid is the plural of the word maqsid or maqsad, right? Which means a destination, a place that a person has intended to reach or to visit, right? So, in a deeper context in relation to Sharia, what it maqasid means is the meanings and the wisdom that is observed in Islamic laws and regulations, right? Especially, uh, yeah. So the meanings and wisdom that can be observed in Islamic laws, whether generally or specifically, right? Uh, s- some might say that the purpose of this is for us to realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uh, is there to improve human condition, right? And so that we can submit ourselves in his servitude. This is an important point because the maqasid of Sharia themselves uh, cannot be directly used to derive laws because of their abstract nature, but they can help understand laws or understand other causes which then could be used in order to make laws. And I think this is a very important to notice because there's a section of people nowadays who use the maqasid of Sharia and they use it in that abstract sense in order to undo all of that which has been done in fiqh till up till now. And what their intentions are, nobody knows. But this maras, I would say, this disease of trying to reconcile everything that is happening in the West with Islam, I think it's very problematic. At one point, we have to accept that there will be points where the two of them cannot ever combine or cannot meet eye to eye. We need to realize that fact. But what happens is when you have to make everybody happy, you can use something as abstract as the maqasid in order to redefine and reinterpret the entire Quran, the entire study, rendering everything done before that as useless, right? And this again is problematic because if you reinterpret everything, that is giving the impression that Islam was never protected. The meanings of the Quran or the Hadith were never protected. The understanding of the fuqaha from the time of the Sahaba up till now has always been flawed or incomplete, right? And this in itself, if you think about it, is very problematic. So they are the meanings and wisdoms behind Islamic law, but they're not the actual causes of the law, right? And so we mentioned there are five of them, five primary ones. First of which is religion, right? And that's, I guess, the most important thing, is the preservation of the Sharia. Because if you don't have a religion. If you don't have Islam, then there is no Muslim Ummah. There is no Muslim, right? That's what makes it the most important thing. So everything which could potentially harm a person's religion has been made haram, right? So if you see some of the wasail, some of the methods by which this happens, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made, for example, shirk haram. وَاعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. Worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exclusively and do not associate partners with Him, right? Because what could be worse than shirk, right? That because that undermines deen in its entirety. And it is to the point that if someone becomes an apostate, and that is actually becoming problematic for the entire society, it's creating this leave the deen culture because now it's becoming a fashion, right? This kind of trend, if it's creating other problems, like this apostate is now inviting other people to apostasy, for example. If this is kind of case happening, Islam even prescribes the death penalty for such a person. Man baddala dinahu faqtuluh. Whoever changes his religion and then put him to death. And I should point out that it does not mean that anybody has or everybody has the permission to do that. This has to happen at a state level. This punishment can only be carried out at a state level, number one. Number two, you can't just kill anyone you know to be an apostate. Not even the state can do that. That person must be outspoken about their apostasy, should be inviting people to it, or causing other sort of problems. Maybe going to war with you, sharing state secrets, and whatever. Just changing the religion and you knowing of it is not sufficient grounds to actually carry out this penalty. Again, totally different discussion, but it's not as absolute as the words of the hadith might seem. Keep that in mind as well. Right. Similarly, uh, every other sinful or bad act which could lead to an ikhtilal in the society, uh, a disruption in the flow of society, is also been made haram by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So all of the sin, each sin that you may think is going to affect your religion and subsequently affect the society as a whole. And so they have been made forbidden. And for this very purpose, we're also given the amal of da'wah and ta'aleem, that you have to invite other people and enjoin good. Not just to Islam, even amongst Muslims, there should be some act of tabligh, inviting people towards good, right? Because this helps preserve the deen. Now, what is the relationship of uh, this first maqsad with medicine? Well, number one, you are able to protect the acts of ibadat with this because medical treatment directly uh, affects how the health of a person, and that then affects how they are able to perform the acts of worship in a proper manner, right? And it provides the body with the strength and gives the aql enough stability to be able to perform all of the acts of ibadat. And you'll see that most of the important ibadat or the pillars of Islam actually depend on our physical strength. Uh, Prayer depends on us having strength in our bodies. Saum depends on us having enough strength to go through the entire day without having the need to take food. And the Hajj and Umrah is not a pillar, but still a great ibadah, uh, requires a lot of physical effort. If you ever had the chance to go to Hajj or even Umrah, right? And so obviously a weak body is and capable of performing all of these ibadat in the best possible manner. And mental health is another aspect of health in general, because if you don't have good mental health, if your understanding is weak, you might not even be able to understand your aqaid properly. This could be problematic. Also, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made seeking treatment through means of magic and means of other such items, the use of artifacts, tamaim, for example, taking magic or, I don't know, voodoo medicine. So these things are made forbidden for the fact that they may involve shirk or assistance from people other than, or things, entities other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's how religion is related to medicine. Second of all, you have life, right? So not only has Islam made laws related to uh, retribution, prescribed punishments, expiation, and redemptions, I saw all of these civil laws which are there to protect the life of the people. It's also instated many ways to actually prevent these crimes in itself, to prevent qatl, for example, right? So whenever Islam prohibits something, it prohibits everything leading up to that as well. So, for example, how do you prevent all of these things from happening? The blood of a Muslim or even a Zimmi, a non Muslim person living in a Muslim country, or even the blood of those people who you are not actively engaged in war with, or any part of their body, not just their life, any part of their body, that is protected by the Sharia. You're not allowed to transgress on any of that. Uh, and also for this reason, because life is sacred and our bodies are in a way sacred, anything which is of no benefit to the human body, that is also impermissible, right? So committing suicide would be impermissible. Washam, like tattoos, are impermissible because you have to like pierce through the skin, and it has no benefits, actual benefits whatsoever. Just because it looks cool might not be something that the Sharia really is concerned about. Also, al khisa, that is something which is also impermissible. So anything basically which might result in had or qisas is not allowed. Also, as I explained, there are many different punishments there for any kind of attack against a human life or a human body. So, for example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا, and this is not just the Islamic law, its law has been coming to us from centuries. For even in the Torah or in the Injil, this law is mentioned. أن النفس بالنفس والعين بالعين والأنف بالأنف والأذن بالأذن والسن بالسن والجروح قصاص. That a life for a life, an eye for an eye, a nose for a nose, an ear for an ear, a teeth for a teeth. والجروح قصاص, and whatever injuries that one might sustain, there's qisas in that as well, right? So you really, it's just not allowed. And just like you can't harm another person, you can't harm yourself. Suicide, not allowed. You to donate a vital organ of yours, not allowed. Um, and not only that, even unborn children are protected. So abortion, for example, in most cases is not allowed. There's very few specific cases that we will talk about later on, but as a general rule, abortion is also impermissible. Mercy killings, not impermissible. Hatta life is so important that even asking for death has been strongly advised against. So the Prophet mentioned, لا يتمنين أحدكم الموت من ضر أصحابه. That if you are inflicted with a calamity in your life, this should not be the reason why you're asking for death. Other than if you're asking for shahada, it's okay. If a person wishes for death because they don't want to face the fitan of this world for the protection of their deen, that is also okay. But asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for death because of some worldly infliction, that is something that's even not allowed. She guess or make an assessment of how important life is in the eyes of Sharia. Islam also prohibits mutilation for the desire of gratification or for the sake of revenge, right? Torture, humiliation, whatever the reason is. Uh, Also, when it comes to protecting life, those things which are haram can also become halal if the result and objective of that is to save a life. So you can't eat pork normally, but if you have nothing else to eat and you might die, you're allowed to eat it, right? وَمَنِ اضْطُرَّ غَيْرَ بَاغٍ وَلَا عَادٍ فَلَا إِثْمَ عَلَيْهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. That if you are forced to eat something that which is haram, consume that which is haram, but you don't want it, or neither are you transgressing limits in there, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is most forgiving and most merciful. Now, what is the relationship of this maqsad with medicine? Well, medical treatment has been sanctioned by Islam, made legitimate by Islam, because again, it protects your life. But it's not only that, it has been made wajib. And I mentioned the hadith of Osama ibn Sharik, in which the Prophet Islam ordered the people of the village to use medicine. And so, just like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet alayhi salam talked about seeking treatment or talked about taking, seeking treatment, they also emphasized the need to protect yourself from becoming sick in the first place, right? And so that is why, for those medical diseases which are what we know as transmittive, like they can transfer from one person to another, uh, we are told to stay away from such places or even such people if possible. أي لا يورد ممرز على مصح, that a sick person who has this communicable disease should not mix with people in good health. Now, some of you might have a question of whether or not one disease can be transferred from one person to another, like we had COVID-19. right? This is more of a theological debate than it is a jurisprudential debate, and I'm still gonna leave it at that. Whether you believe in causation or not really doesn't matter, or the end result in both cases remains the same, that it is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who does everything. Whether he does through by material means, by making something a secondary cause, or he does it without any material means, him being the primary cause of whatever it is. But what we see with our eyes is that some diseases do transfer from one person to another via means of contact or airborne diseases as we know them. So even if you don't believe in the causation, you would still avoid interacting with such a sick person, provided there is nothing else involved there, uh, because it is a hukum of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger. All right, and also premarital scans, that is something which Islam allows because you'd want to know potential health risk that you could have in your future children, or maybe any infectious diseases that could be transferred from your partner to you if you do choose to get married. So you'd want to know those imkaniyat and possibilities as well. So let's quickly finish this. Number three, we have intellect, which is the manat of taqlif. If you don't have aql, then you're not the locus of obligation, then you cannot be a mukallaf, right? And so that is why majaneen, those people who don't have that kind of intellect, none of the laws of ahkam apply to them, right? And so the mental capacity that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has honored Muslims and favored them with the other living creatures. So the Sharia's intent upon forbidding anything that could cause harm to the mind or the intellect. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made haram kullu muskil, everything that intoxicates for the same purpose. And you also have a capital punishment if someone is found intoxicated, right? The khamar in all its form has been made haram. And so that is why the use of alcohol or wine specifically in order to make medicines is also forbidden. إِنَّهَا لَيْسَتْ بِدَوَاءٍ وَلَكِنَّهَا دَاءٌ. On the words of the Prophet Islam, it is not a cure, it is a disease. Right? And the Sharia has also made forbidden all other drugs that could lead to potentially uh, bad influence on your mental health. And you could see most of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran a lot of times, uh, the whole purpose of tawakkul and the whole purpose of believing in the divine decree is so that you don't live a life of anxiety and tension. Like so many of the ADHD and other mental diseases are because people are constantly agitated by what's happening in their lives. And so the fiqh of heart, the tawakkul, and the belief in the qadr and all of these things are there to also help protect a person's intellect. And did you know that even for the sake of like tarbiyah, you're not allowed to hit the face or the head of any person? Like you might hit a child's arm, for example, again, or maybe playing sports, totally okay. But if you're like playing sports like boxing, you can complete professionally, and that would be impermissible. Why? Because your head is exposed and always possible that might get hurt, and you might get a concussion or a more serious medical condition. And so anything which would result into a person's intellect being affected, or you being the reason another person's intellect or mind is affected, is also made impermissible. Like I mentioned, the use of drugs and intoxicants except for obviously in the case of haja, maybe sometimes you would need to use uh, anesthetic medicine, then that would be okay, but normally it would not be allowed. And so that's why if local anesthesia is sufficient, then you cannot knock out a person. You must have heard the old saying, a sound mind in a sound body, right? And so, as we know, protecting the body is equal to protecting the mind. And so, all of the medication prescriptions that are happening for us to protect our bodies, healthy diet, exercise, everything else would also be included in the maqsad of protecting intellect. The fourth maqsad you have is حفظ العرز والنسل, i.e. the protection, preservation of dignity, lineage and progeny. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited aggression against a person's dignity, just as He has made forbidden aggression against a person's life and property. The last message of the Prophet Islam in Hajjatul Wida, فَإِنَّ دِمَاءَكُمْ وَأَمْوَالَكُمْ وَأَعْرَاضَكُمْ عَلَيْكُمْ حَرَامٌ, that your lives, your wealth, and your dignity amongst each other is haram. So how do we protect a person's dignity? Well, every fawahish has been made haram. Zina is made haram. Homosexuality is haram. Why? Because this results in a destruction of society. Homosexuality in the case because that's literally putting an end to society. Zina because then your lineage is not protected. Person will not know who their father is, right? A person's dignity is not protected. Those involved in zina, especially if you're like someone's a serial fornicator, then they don't have a dignity in society at all, right? And if a person becomes so cheap that everybody can have access to them, again, that person loses all their self-respect and self-worth. So that's how making such acts haram. The other way is making qadaf haram. So you can't accuse anybody of such a heinous crime unless you have absolute proof. Because if someone does, then they will be flogged. So والذين يرمون المحسنات ثم لم يأتوا بأربعة شهداء فاجلدوهم 80 جلدة ولا تقبلوا لهم شهادة أبدا وأولئك هم الفاسقون. That if someone accuses a chaste woman or a man of zina and then they don't produce 4 witnesses, punishment one, flog them 80 times. Punishment number two, never again will you be accepting their testimony at all. So such a high level of punishment is being prescribed. And so you don't play around with people's dignity. And also in order to prevent this from happening, uh, without any necessity, it is haram for a man to uh, treat a woman or a woman to treat a man medically, except for their mahram, of course, or for other reasons. And also, it is haram for a tabib, a doctor, to segregate with a patient of the opposite gender without any necessity. All of this for the sake of protecting a person's heirs, a dignity. Then you have means to protect a person's progeny, right? So, for example, it's impermissible to kill a person's children for the fear of poverty. Number one, except for a dire need, it's impermissible to perform abortion. It's also impermissible to actually destroy a person's capability of reproducing. So, a vasectomy, for example, is also made impermissible for this very reason that nasl or progeny is protected. And now, lastly, you have حفظ المال, the protection of wealth, property. right? What are the means of doing that? Well, first of all, everybody is encouraged to earn halal. Second of all, you are not allowed to do injustice on other people's rights, right? And to this extent, Islam has made contracts legitimate. So you can literally make contracts and they're binding on you. Partnerships, ijara, whatever. So there are different many contracts in Islam in order to preserve uh, the money or financial status of people within the society. Well, how to protect wealth? Number one, regulating financial dealings. That's one way to do it. Number two, prohibition of transgression on other people's property. One more way is to make spending of wealth in haram activities. So that's also impermissible. So you can't waste your money on, let's say, music concerts, late night parties, and stuff like that. Also, highly discouraged is israf, to purposely uh, spend your wealth. That's also something that's made haram or impermissible. What is the connection of mal with medicine? Well, in order to have specialized physicians and doctors, which is the first kifaya, you need to support those people, right? So the government should provide funds for them when needed. And obviously, you're going to have to pay them because they can't do this for free, right? And so uh, that's where wealth comes in. In order to support medical schools, in order to support doctors, you would need funds to do that, which comes through the wealth. Number two, a doctor should also take financial conditions of the patient into account, right? So, what if they really need a surgery but they can't afford it? Or they need some medication which might be too expensive for them to afford. So, well, you need ways to tackle that problem as well. Maybe you have services like the NHS, so the government provides for you. One of the ways used there is to have medical insurance. We'll talk about that in more details about its permissibility or impermissibility, but it could be where money is involved. And also, it is better that you have laws intact, or the doctor should have their own salary rather than actually a state-sponsored salaries, because this will help regulate medical treatment. Else, the person with more money is going to get the treatment, and the person who can't afford that might be deprived of it. And that is a connection of medicine with wealth. And with